Hi, I'm Inc.'s editor-at-large, Tom Foster. Welcome to this session of the Purpose Power Summit. The chicken or the egg? Does a category drive purpose, or does purpose transcend categories? I'm excited about this subject because it gets right to the heart of brand purpose, in the sense that it gets to the question of whether purpose is something that is innate in a category or something that has to be sort of intentionally built. We have three rock stars from three very different industries here to talk about this subject with us. With us today are Deanna Bratter. She is the head of sustainable development for Danone North America. Also Vivek Bapat, the senior vice president in charge of purpose and sustainability marketing at SAP. And finally, Terry Ballack is the director of global external communications at KimberlyClarks. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Deanna, I want to start with you. I would like to ask you just very simply, can you explain a little bit what purpose means within your company, how you guys define purpose?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. I definitely think it's helpful to start with an understanding of what is purpose when we think about purpose companies and purpose brands, which for us at Danone is a company that thinks and acts in ways that put forward the collective interests of all stakeholders, society and the planet, both short-term and long-term, together with business strategy and also business growth ambitions. For us at Danone, our company was founded over 100 years ago in 1919 in Spain, with a focus on helping people suffering from intestinal disorders, in particular related to malnutrition. So purpose in terms of striving to help society and solve a problem was key to the beginning, the growth of the business. And then later on in 1972, the CEO at the time, Antoine Riboud, gave a speech that is often thought of as quite historic, both for our company and for social business, and really set the stage that responsibility doesn't stop at the factory or office door, that it's clear that growth should no longer be an end in and of itself, but a tool to serve the quality of life. And not be detrimental to it. So that really set the stage more than 100 years ago for Danone and how our company activates purpose and lives it within our business. That idea of social and economic impact continues to grow strong, and I think it's best represented through the reality that today we are one of the world's largest certified B corporations. And here in North America, we are incorporated as a public benefit corporation. And this means that legally, through our articles of incorporation, we are committed to balancing people, purpose, profit, and focusing on a broad set of stakeholders, including society and environment, in our business growth ambition. And then one step further than that legal framework is really the B Corp certification, which is a voluntary certification that any for-profit business can participate in. And it really puts together these ideas of not just performance on those social and environmental topics, but also governance and how purpose is tied to your core governance, and then transparency. It's great to make commitments to do the work, but really driving it through transparency and a willingness to be very clear on how you balance profit and purpose is critical. And so being part of this movement of public benefit corps and B Corps is also a way where we can be part of a movement helping all business, all categories, industries see the role they can play in using their business as a force for good.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Vivek, I want to ask you the same question. How do you, within your company, how is purpose defined?
Yeah, so I think very similar to how Deanna articulated the story of Danone, right? Purpose has been a central part of SAP's strategy for the last 50 years since its inception. And what we have tried to do is to really be very particular and intentional about what our purpose is based upon the growth of the organization over that time period. So for instance, at its inception, the purpose of SAP was really around solving business problems for technologists and business leaders around the world. And when we found that these businesses began to have an outsized impact on the local communities, for instance, in which they operated, and the world at large, SAP's purpose expanded to help to basically articulate how we were, through our customers, enabling and helping the world run better. And once social media and consumerization actually entered into the mainstream of business activity, what we felt was that through the work that we were doing with our technology, with our customers, and through the work that our customers were actually doing with their end customers, we were ultimately trying to impact the lives of people that we ultimately touched. So the purpose of SAP has intentionally grown over those periods of time, and it's kept pace with, I would say, the market forces, the situational demands on businesses in the state of the world. And the way that we look at purpose is really twofold. The first is that of an exemplar of purpose, meaning because we operate a business and we're a business entity, ourselves, what is the type of example that we can set for our peers in the industry and those that we touch? So there's an exemplar view of purpose. And then the second, which is an actually huge opportunity and a privileged role for the company, is how can we enable our customers, through the use of our products and solutions and technologies, realize their own purpose. And I'm really proud to be on a panel here where, I know Kimberly-Clark and, Danone are both amazing customers of SAP. And by virtue of the work that we do with more than 400,000 customers all over the world, we're able to actually help realize not just our purpose, but also help many of these organizations, large and small, achieve their own vision and purpose as well.
And touch consumers sort of that way as well. Yeah, yeah. Fascinating. Terry, same question to you.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because, much like Deanna, Kimberly-Clark actually will celebrate its 150th anniversary next year. So since 1872, when we were founded in Wisconsin, there's been this element of care that's been behind every single thing that we do. And we think about that from the very beginning of what we know about the company. And so through this lens, as I think about how purpose has really come to fruition for Kimberly-Clark, it's been around this idea of better care and this idea that we can do more to advance that. And, just think about the different products that we offer. They've certainly been in the spotlight, but as you think about even before the pandemic, what you saw is, 2 billion people around the world who don't have access to sanitation and clean water. You have people that, are still experiencing a lot of the stigmas related to periods and incontinence. And so we think about it in the sense of how do we provide better care, but we do, put that at the intersection of what we provide in terms of solutions to those, because, I think more than ever, we've realized how essential our products are to people and how much people rely on them when they're not there. So we really think about that as part of the context and the types of programs that we pursue, but it is that kind of singular focus on care that I think really rises above and has really been a part of who we are for 150 years and is really starting to become, clearer to us, coming out of the pandemic.
I think it's fascinating that each of you talked about sort of the long histories of the companies you work for, and how purpose has sort of grown and evolved, as the companies have grown and evolved and diversified. It's the parallel is really interesting. Terry, I want to stick with you for just a moment and ask sort of a natural extension to that, which is that, okay, we've talked about sort of evolution over this long period of time in the company's history. We have just come through 15 months or so of really, a radical shift due to the pandemic and really some other factors that occurred, pretty dramatic forces that we all navigated over the last year and change. I would love to know sort of how purpose within Kimberly-Clark evolved over that time in the last, year and a half.
Yeah, I think it's a tough place to play, I think, in the sense that, for us, it was uncomfortable that sometimes toilet paper was more of the story than the pandemic itself. It's a difficult place to be because you realize that this wasn't necessary to be in this place. But ultimately, what we've seen is that the supply chain itself was exposed in lots of different ways. And we sat there and we looked at it and we said, we know that our products are absolutely essential to consumers, but we won't be able to meet those needs if we don't start with our own people. And so when we looked at all of that through the lens of care, the intersection, if you will, is really around this idea of taking our purpose and saying we have to put the health and safety of our people first and foremost as we go about any plans that we look at, because if they're not available to make them, we're not available to deliver them. And so we saw that as absolutely critical element to say, when we think about putting their health, their safety, their family's health and safety at the forefront, it became our kind of way to make sure that our essential products made it to consumers. And in a lot of ways, I think we saw our brands pick up on what the company did almost naturally. We started working from home in terms of our offices, a good 2.5 weeks before most US businesses started taking that action. It's the same in our manufacturing facilities when it came to putting in those protocols. But I think as it went on and it went on and it went on, what we realized is we needed to bring our consumers on this journey with us now, right? And so you started to see some of the advertising that we did was around Share a Square. And this is just a simple idea, but through that lens of purpose and caring, this idea of one of the ways we can care for one another, for our neighbor, for our communities is to not hoard toilet paper. And if there's someone in need, share a square, share a roll. And, it was very inspiring to a lot of our people that our brands took that kind of action as well, because they're working as hard as they can, 24/7 to make these essential products. And so to see our brands then chipping in with marketing that reminded consumers of how they can extend this kind of care during this time really meant a lot. And I think it really propelled us to, be more articulate in our purpose as a company. Again, as I said, for almost 150 years, we've had this sense of care, but it became so singular a focus throughout.
Fascinating. Deanna, I would like to throw that question to you as well. I imagine there are some interesting parallels and maybe just for the differences in sort of at the product level, maybe some interesting differences in strategy also as purpose sort of evolved over this last challenging year and change.
Yeah, I would say some parallels and some differences being in the food space. Our mission, which is obviously grounded in our purpose, is to bring health through food to as many people as possible. And early on in the pandemic, when we were, somewhat quickly faced with challenges across managing supply chain, transportation, in the face of purchasing volatility, panic buying, pantry loading, despite a strong food for basic foods like dairy products, also the closure of restaurants and schools forced a shift in eating at home to a degree that we've not seen before. And so similarly, our focus was immediately on safety, looking within our business, across our business, ensuring that we were implementing everything we could to protect our employees, keeping a safe working environment, and keeping our lines running because the demand was ever increasing. There's also an element of really feeling a sense of responsibility to support and engage deeply within our supply chain. So we could focus on our manufacturing. We also have hundreds of dairy farmers across the US, and then of course a variety of other ingredients sourced globally, but really making sure that we were keeping the lines of communication open, that we were securing things like PPE, not just for our employees, those who we could tuck safe at home, we did, and others who needed to stay on what we call the front lines of the food system, we needed to do our part to protect them. So I think there was absolutely a huge activation and a huge effort there. And that's really a responsibility of the business, of any business. as we've gone through this. But then we also had those societal impacts that were rapid, pretty quickly emerging. For example, when it comes to food security, pre-pandemic, 1 out of every 8, and then more recently 1 out of every 7 before the pandemic were suffering from some level of food insecurity. During the early months of the pandemic, it quickly shifted to 1 in 6 Americans facing hunger or food insecurity, either without access or without funds to be able to get the foods they need. And when they were able to get food, is it fresh food? Is it balanced food? And is it healthy food, going back to the mission? So this was another area where we were able to activate both in our own warehouses and our own products of making sure that we were getting food to people in need, but also in supporting other nonprofits and partners so that we could get food moved, get it accessed, and make sure that those who were in need were getting the food and the nutrition that they needed. So a variety of platforms there. We had one brand in particular, a Too Good yogurt brand, whose mission, it's a newer brand, it's only about 2 years old, and their mission is around reducing waste in the food system. So they've recently launched a program where they secure otherwise wasted fruit from the fields, and then create a product. It's called Good Save, where they're using, in this case, Meyer lemons that would have otherwise been wasted. It's a verified rescued fruit is what it's called. And then putting that in product, and then proceeds from that product work in partnership with nonprofits like City Harvest, making sure that otherwise wasted food get to people in need. So really looking at a systems approach. And we saw during the pandemic, not only was need at an all-time high, but waste was at an all-time high. And so when we can look for these opportunities to sort of close the gap across the system, I think that's when purpose really feels like it's coming together, and when we can have systems-wide positive impact and at least do our best to close those loops.
That's a really cool example. Vivek, I keep thinking of you as I listen to those last 2 answers, because, you know, thinking about companies like Kimberly-Clark and Danone, and as they had to really urgently scramble to deliver on their purpose in a you know, very quickly, radically changed environment, I imagine that changed, you know, the company's needs, your clients' needs, in really interesting ways. And I'm curious how that played out at SAP over the past, again, you know, 15 months or so.
Yes, Tom, I think one of the advantages, I would say, the sort of the uniqueness that we have within our business is being able to serve so many different customers across so many different regions. And so what we're able to see is what are some of the big patterns that emerge out of these regional as well as global situations. I think, as Terry and Deanna have talked about before, our primary focus when the COVID crisis hit was making sure that we did everything for our own workforce and our people. So that was the first thing that we focused on, whether it was remote work, whether it was help related to mental health. You know, the human dimension, specifically the focus on employees and workforce, was absolutely the #1 priority. And by extension, we knew that this was a priority for many of our customers as well. So what we came up with were specific dedicated solutions and packages that we offered, in many cases free, to our customers so that they were able to manage their workforce very, very effectively at the time. But we also knew that maintaining business continuity for most businesses was a super critical issue. So how do you, you know, now that you're all of a sudden dealing with a distributed workforce that you might not have dealt with before, how do you maintain business continuity? So we were able to enable our customers with specific solutions, again, to help them maintain business continuity as they navigated this crisis themselves. At the same time, what we also saw was that there were other social issues that were popping up as well. As we know, you know, during this crisis, we've seen not just the immediate response that was needed for COVID, but there were lots of other big issues that were magnified. And in some cases, the way that we went about it was by partnerships through multiple NGOs and organizations to speed up relief efforts, for instance. But in other cases, what we were able to do is to bring together many of our customers within the same domain, for instance, within the pharmaceutical domain, and bring them all together as one network or as one community to be able to share information and data with each other so that the collaboration across these partners was much more efficient. So in fact, in terms of responding to the delivery, the supply chain delivery, I would say, the logistics involved with the delivery of these vaccines, many of these vaccines, we were able to bring in 18 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies together so that they could actually collaborate on a single platform to enable faster responsiveness to the crisis and to the delivery of vaccines into people's arms. So there's a multitude of things that we were able to do, but at the same time, what we knew was that the longer term issues, particularly related to climate change, and I think, Deanna, you brought up the idea of waste, for instance, in these global supply chains, those problems were not going away. So in some ways, the period over the last 12 months has helped us do is to really come to terms with what is it that we do in a way that's unique and differentiated and can scale across the world. And what we've landed on is basically three core topics. The first one is around climate action, which is enabling companies to really get a handle on carbon footprint and emissions, not just within their business, but across their extended network of partners. So that's one big area that we're focused on. The second one is the reduction and elimination of waste in supply chains. I think, Deanna, you brought up the food example. We know that food insecurity is a huge problem even in America. So how do you actually reduce or create alternative uses for products and create new sources of supply as well as demand in those types of supply chains? But there are other issues as well. So packaging materials, for instance, related to plastics. So we're looking at those types of big problems across multiple supply chains, and we're focused on eliminating or helping companies move into the circular economy. And then the final piece is really looking at issues related to social justice. And so being able to provide companies the ability to source from diverse suppliers, for instance, or be able to ensure that whatever they're procuring and supplying to others is based on ethical human practices. So we've landed very, very clearly on 3 or 4 significant areas where we believe we can have a disproportionate impact.
That's powerful, and those are huge areas, really interesting. It's also a really good seg. I think I want to, Vivek, stick with you for this next question to start, which is, I want to get at, the central question for this session, which is, we talked about chicken or egg. Is purpose sort of innate in a category, or is it something that one needs to sort of build intentionally? I think you were sort of alluding to that just now, but I would love for you to sort of directly address that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, purpose is about authenticity, and authenticity is about what are the values of the company, right? And I think when you start looking at an intentional strategy around purpose, as opposed to purpose just being some kind of a side project somewhere, right? When you start looking at purpose as a core part of your business strategy, then what you are basically able to do is to make sure that you're able to actually be very finely attuned to the needs of your customers, right? The markets that you serve, the communities that you're in, and be able to intentionally come up with almost a strategic approach to purpose, as opposed to a philanthropic or just a CSR orientation to purpose. And in our case, what we have done is the way that we articulate purpose and sustainability is a huge issue as well. And I think there's a lot of confusion around some of these terms. The way that we tend to look at it is that purpose is really our brand aspiration, and sustainability is the activation of purpose within the customer context. So when we talk to our customers, of course, we'll collaborate on the basis of shared purpose and shared values. But when it comes to the business implementation, this is where SAP is really talking about sustainability in those particular areas that I mentioned: carbon, emissions, for instance, climate action, circular economy, and then equality and diversity for all.
Really interesting. Terry, I want to ask you that same question about sort of, is purpose something that is sort of innately tied to a category, or is it something that needs to be more intentionally built?
So first of all, it's a great question. I think that as we kind of look back just in the last 18 months, it'd be very easy to say that the category transcends purpose. But when we take a deeper look back and we think about the categories that we're in are categories that we invented. And so we think all the way back to 1920 when we introduced the Kotex brand, coming out of these observations and uses of our product by nurses on the front lines of World War I, and then saying, wait, our products serve a higher order. That's really powerful. And so it's always been about this sense of care for our consumers. And as we think about consumers' needs, both the ones they know about and what they don't, they lead us to tackle things like stigmas and incontinence and even diaper rash. So, in a lot of ways, we're not trying to solve the problem of a better diaper. We're trying to solve the problem of skin health. We're trying to look at how we could keep, women in their careers and girls in schools and things like that, so that the period doesn't get in the way of their progress and things of that nature. So I think that's what's really exciting. And then you put it all to the test, and even amidst the pandemic last year, we still forged ahead and announced that we're pursuing science-based targets for climate and new ambitions to have our environmental footprint in areas of plastics and water and forests. So for me, it became, when you look at the big picture, purpose absolutely transcends our categories.
Awesome. Deanna, same question to you.
Yeah, I am in the camp of purpose transcends categories. I think in part because at its essence, at the core of business purpose is greater good. And the idea that purpose needs to manifest itself from a variety of levels, including from within the company, for our people, with others, across stakeholders, delivering the values that our shareholders expect, delivering on our growth ambition, but also the broader stakeholders of society, of community, even competitors across our categories, and then from the broadest sense out into the world and that greater societal impact that we can play a part in. And so, my perspective is that every category needs to be doing its part to address these critical issues like climate change and food insecurity. And these are collective and I would say massive problems or challenges, and they will take equally massive collective action to address them. So if there are spaces where purpose doesn't transcend category, it should. There is an element of materiality, making sure that as a business, we are focusing on the areas where we have the biggest impact and where we can have the biggest positive impact or role in transformation. And as a food company, we know that from a climate perspective, more than 2/3 of our emissions come from agriculture. So this means we know clearly where we need to lean in, where we need to start, and where we need to play a very active role in transformation. One of our brands, Horizon Organic Dairy, is activating purpose through a commitment to be carbon positive by 2025. So carbon neutral, and then going beyond to capture more carbon than they create. And this is pretty radical in a dairy system that produces a lot of greenhouse gas emissions and methane. And by unlocking process, practices, technologies, transformation, and honestly, on the ground partnership with farmers, we can implement things like soil health and transition to regenerative agriculture that help change the system and use the category of dairy, in this case, for collective effort and collective action. So I think overall, we really see the opportunity to use our purpose to transcend category and deliver that business as a force for good.
This is all so fascinating, and I feel like we are we could go on with this conversation for quite a while. I wish we were all in the same room and had a few hours to do that. Unfortunately, we are running out of time right now, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. Really fascinating conversation, and thank you everybody for watching.